Welcome back to Philosophy Class, ladies and gentlemen. Today we consider Book 9 and we come to the conclusion of our consideration of the Republic. It is in the beginning of Book 9 that Socrates begins to speak more specifically about the actual person who is tyrannical within himself or herself. In that person, Socrates begins a discussion of the subconscious. It's often thought that no one talked about the subconscious in philosophy or psychology until the time of Freud. But in actuality, here in Book 9 in the Republic, we have a very serious and deep consideration of the role of the subconscious. You'll notice, for example, between 571d and 571e, that Socrates begins to reflect on the role of the rational element before we go to sleep. In other words, how what we're thinking about right before we go to sleep awakens certain elements in us and can even affect our dreams, can affect our desires, and therefore can affect the rest of our life. It's an interesting little section. Awakening the rational element before going to sleep, feasting it on fine arguments and investigations. Well, I don't know too many of us who probably think about fine arguments right before we go to sleep. At any rate, Socrates is very much attuned to the role of the subconscious in the life of the person. There are several other reflections, and some of these I've emphasized in the notes with regard to the relationship between slavery and freedom. As you notice, as the regimes have become corrupted, it seemed as though people and regimes were becoming freer. In actuality, as Socrates points out, this was an illusion. This was, in a sense, the same as the shadows on the wall of the cave. Those were prisoners. They were tied. They thought they were free, but they were as far as they could be from being free. So likewise here, when we get down to the democratic and certainly into the tyrannical city and the tyrannical soul, we see that Socrates realizes and is trying to point out that true freedom comes from the proper discipline and obedience of the appetites, not the allowance for the appetites to run wild in whatever way they might want to. It's kind of a hard lesson for us in the modern world because we prize freedom very highly. We want to do whatever it is that we want to do, and furthermore, we oftentimes think that whatever it is that we want to do is good, precisely because we want to do it. That's a topic, by the way, that'll be dealt with more thoroughly when you get to your ethics class. You might notice between 573b and 573c what looks like an emphasis, or rather a reference to Nietzsche, when Socrates mentions passion as a tyrant, right? If you remember, Nietzsche referred to Socrates as promoting tyranny of the reason. And here Socrates, without obviously actually knowing anything about Nietzsche, is saying that we can be tyrannized likewise by our passions. This is a very detailed section, and one which I've tried to go through as much as I can in the notes, so I won't repeat all of that here. But the section where Socrates is dealing with the tyrannical person is very important, because remember that where Socrates is ultimately looking for justice or righteousness is in the soul. All through the Republic, the city or the society has been used as an analogy. But in reality, the focus is on the person. So, for example, at 576e, when Socrates is reflecting on the life of the tyrant, he reflects that the tyrant really can't be a friend. The tyrant really doesn't know what a true relationship would ever be. Now then, we're going to move through these sections relatively rapidly. There's a little bit more detail in the notes with regard to this first section of Book 9. Recall that in Book 9 there are two sections that we're looking at. One is at the beginning of Book 9. It's a little bit longer, runs from 571a to 582a. And the second section, which is a little bit shorter, runs from 588a to the end of Book 9, which is at 592b. But again, in this first section, I want to call your attention to 580c, where Socrates returns to the original question of the Republic. The question of the Republic really isn't what is justice. The question of the Republic is who is happier? Who leads the better life? The unjust person or the just person? Thrasymachus proposed that the unjust person, the one who believes that justice is the advantage of the stronger, leads the happier and better life. Thrasymachus really thought ultimately that the more vicious you are, the happier you are. Now Socrates, by a methodical, logical, painstaking method here, has tried to show that exactly the opposite is the case of what Thrasymachus has proposed. That if you are unjust, unrighteous, evil, vicious, or even do those things part of the time, you're not really happy. You don't really live a good life. You don't really do what it is that is the fulfillment of your human nature to do. So notice that he addresses this at 580c. And right after that, he goes back into the threefold division of the person and the city. We're really focused on the person. So the threefold division, again, is the reasoning element, the part of us which is most human, the choosing or the willing element, and finally the appetites. The appetites are of course, or is of course, that element is the largest element. So we turn to this final section here, beginning at 588a. And the first thing that Socrates does is he wants you to, as he says, fashion an image. He wants you to draw a picture. Now, if we were in the classroom and the whiteboard was behind me, I would attempt to draw a picture. It wouldn't be a very good picture, but it would get across to you the essence of what Socrates is trying to say here. Notice what he says. He says, fashion an image of the soul in words. This is just above 588c. And the first thing that he wants to do is to fashion a single species of complex, many-headed beast. So this would be the largest section, which would be at the bottom of the picture, so to speak. This would be the largest section representing the beast or representing the appetites. Then Socrates says, fashion another single species, that of a lion, and a single one of the human being. So if you visualize this, if you draw it out, it's actually going to kind of look like a snowman, right? Because you're going to have the largest piece down at the bottom. The one in the middle is going to be smaller, and the one at the top is going to be the smallest of all. So the bottom part represents the beast. The many-headed beast stands for all the appetites. The middle part represents the lion because that's the choosing element, the element by which we're angered and express enthusiasm and so forth. And the smallest element is actually the element that is what we are. It's the human element. Then Socrates says, okay, after you've got these three parts, this is at 588e, he says, fashion around the outside the image of one of them, that of the human being. So you've sort of got this snowman thing with a little bitty head at the top, and then around the whole image, you fashion it in such a way, Socrates says, that from the outside, it looks just like a human being. It doesn't look like a lion, it doesn't look like a beast, it looks like a human being. So which element rules, Socrates says? According to Thrasymachus, the beast rules. According to him, Socrates, the smallest element, the human element rules. Now, I want you to read this section very carefully because I'm not going to go through it and read every word in it and give you every detail of it. So you need to think about this this image, and if you can, if you're more artistically inclined than I am, try to draw a little picture of what Socrates is suggesting here when he says fashion an image of the soul. He's doing it in words. You can do it more graphically if you are able. And then finally, as I mentioned in the notes, reflect on this phrase at 591D, tuning the harmony of his body for the sake of the concord of his soul. At this point, at the end of Book 9, Socrates has essentially completed the argument of the Republic. Book 10 is actually concerned not with the question of whether or not justice is intrinsically good, but whether or not justice is also instrumentally good, that is to say, good for its results. And so there's a couple of fascinating images there in which Socrates proposes that the good person not only does the good, informs his soul in the right way precisely because it's good and good in itself, but Socrates proposes that good results will follow as well in the afterlife. This concludes our consideration of the Republic. After this, we will move on to getting ready for the test and reviewing, and then I will at some point send you the test for your completion.